they're insured.
100%.
And you'd ask, what do I mean by that? I mean that if an event were to occur, those people would have the least amount of resources to be able to come out from that event. So if my car would be stolen, yes, it would be a huge inconvenience to pay it off for the next 5 years with it not being there.
Yes.
But life would still be able to continue.
100%.
So in our honors year, we looked at how we could increase penetration levels amongst that segment, and to understand why that segment was particularly not taking out insurance. What are some of the barriers to that? And for the listeners who don't know what microinsurance is, it's effectively a form of insurance that's geared towards, I'd say, small sum insureds, protecting at a very small scale versus, say, short-term insurance where you protect a whole house or a whole vehicle. Here, it's very low sum insurance. Things like funeral plans would fall into microinsurance. Things like legal expenses covers, where you can get covered for things like retrenchments when you need legal representation. So it's small-scale insurance geared towards the lower LSM categories and to provide a bit of a safety net, but you may not necessarily find yourself getting full indemnity. So on a specific element, you may not get full cover. So let's say on a car, where typically an insurance policy would replace the vehicle at market value or pay it off at market value. For microinsurance, typically what would happen is you may select a sum insured to say that, okay, for this car, even though it's worth 400,000, I choose out a policy for 100K.
Yeah, because that's what I can afford.
Yeah, because that's what I can afford, right? So it helps to bridge a bit of that financial impact. So you can hear that it's typically geared towards the lower NSM. So it's been a segment that I've been passionate about from a very young age because, like I alluded to, I felt that insurance products were necessarily catered towards creating a safety net for the people that need it most. And even when we do create those products, the lack of context means that we don't design them in a way that's most effective and efficient.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting that you say that, because when I was working in the health space, I was designing products for low-income people. And there were numerous things where you were like, okay, it makes sense if you are a high-income person. But now you're not thinking about actual consumer. You're just like, okay, let's try to make it affordable.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than affordability. It's accessibility. And I think that that's a whole nother conversation. And saying, is this actually intuitive? Does it make sense? Does it meet a need? Or are you just trying to make this sort of makeshift product to make it seem like you are helping?
100%. I mean, two additional concrete examples, like things like how you pay, right? So the low income segment doesn't necessarily have recurring income.
Yes.
A monthly premium may make sense, right? So can you allow the policy to be purchased in batches, for example, over time? I think one that increasingly ran into is, especially in Black communities, the concept of dependence. So a lot of times with funeral policies, you'll find that underwriting is done at the claim stage instead of at initial underwriting. So what you'd find is that a grandparent would look after their grandkids if the mother or father passed on. Right?
Yeah.
But they may not necessarily go through the whole process of becoming their legal guardian.
Yes.
Now they take out an insurance policy for the kids, and there's no initial underwriting to ascertain some of this information. Come claim stage underwriting, then one of the things is, are you the legal guardian of these kids? And then the claim would get rejected. So things like that, of just understanding the context within which you operate in and the nuances, then you see that some of the processes that we put in place may need to be tweaked. It's not to say that you remove it altogether, because a lot of it is around risk management.
Yes, 100%.
But how you carry out that process would look different versus, say, a different segment. So that's an industry that I'm very passionate about. Now, the microinsurance practicing certificate, what that means is that as an actuary, I've built up the technical competency to be able to, one, review like calculations and income statements and the likes of microinsurance companies, but then to also be able to sign off on certain of their returns. So it's almost a bit of a certification over and above being an actuary, to say that over and above the competencies that you need to qualify as an actuary, you've built up specialist expertise in the specific area that allow you to be able to sign off on the results and act as a bit of a line of defense against policyholders, but also ensuring that the company remains financially sound. So it's a
very responsible job, that actually.
Yeah.
Because the microinsurance space, there's also a mass of people that you are servicing. I mean, in South Africa, our microinsurance market is massive. It's the majority of our country.
100%. So you carry that responsibility with you, because if any of those organizations were not to be financially sound, the people who bear the biggest impact are the policyholders, right?
Yeah.
And the segments that they target means that financial impact will impact them disproportionately.
Yes.
So if an insurance company were to tank now, and I've paid up some life policy premiums, it's not great, but
you can continue. Yeah, exactly.
Versus someone who's paid this funeral cover for so long, and then that insurance company tanks, then the ability for them to pivot into another funeral policy may be constrained. So it carries, I think, an additional responsibility given the segment that those companies would play.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. And I think, just looking at your bio now and talking through some of your other qualifications, because there's so much I think that you can add. You acted as a chief risk officer.
It was full time.
Which is, just speak to that role, because that's also quite a niche role for an actuary, because that's looking at risk holistically, right? It's not just a very sort of drilled down and saying, what is the risks of this unit or this business unit that I'm looking at, and how are they being managed altogether?
Yeah, so it was a full-time appointment. I know I didn't do it for too long, but I was actually appointed full-time into that role when I went to FNB short-term insurance. So for people who may not necessarily to avoid losing people along the way, when I left Ernst & Young, where I was working with Margie and the rest of the team, I went to FNB short-term.
Yeah.
At a time where they had just gotten their short-term insurance license. So they had historically had their life license and now pivoted to short-term insurance. And I was brought in at the time to come and start up their corporate actuarial department. And that's really the department that's responsible for things like valuations, capital modeling, so understanding what are the different risks that the business is exposed to and what capital you need to set aside to mitigate against those, how much of the premium you need to set aside to meet future claims. So topics like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for 2 and a bit years. And then the organization asked me to assume the role of chief risk officer at FNB at a very young age. I think when I was appointed, I was 26 at the time. So yeah, I can probably, with a lot of confidence, say I was probably one of the youngest CROs for a financial services organization of that scale.
Yes.
Right, as FNB. So what that meant at the time was that I was now responsible for end-to-end management of risk within the business. So ensuring that in everything that we do, we put a risk perspective for it, because look, insurance by its very nature is in the business of taking on risk.
Yeah.
But we need to make sure that as we take on risk, we are optimizing. So you're optimizing your risk-adjusted return.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times when people hear chief risk officer, they think someone puts the brakes on the business. But it's actually just someone who needs to then say that in as much as we're pursuing growth, are we pursuing growth in the least risky way? Yes. And are we optimizing, even if we do pursue risky business, are we optimizing the returns that we make given the risks that we're bringing on? So I was literally responsible for holistic management of risk across the short-term insurance business. So I was part of the executive team at the time and doing things like understanding what are the different risk limits that we need to put in place, how are we tracking against those, what is our own risk and solvency assessment. So if we look at our business plans over a 3 or 5 year horizon, what are the risks that we're exposed to? How do we manage those? How do we respond if those were to occur? What mitigations do we need to put in place, the controls? So a lot of that type of business, so being really a partner to the organization in ensuring that as we carry out the natural order of the organization, we just put on a bit of a risk hat and we put in place the right controls to mitigate the risk in the organization.
Sure. And tell me, I mean, you also did an MBA, right? So when in this crazy achievement pathway did you find the time to do that? And on top of that, why do an MBA? I mean, you're a FASA, which is very well regarded, not only in South Africa, across the world. Why add an MBA lens to that? Why did you consider that to be important?
So in terms of when I did my MBA, so I did my MBA part-time with Wits Business School, so University of Witwatersrand, the business school. And I did that against a lot of advice when I was actually appointed the head of corporate actuarial for F&B short-term. So I did it simultaneously while setting up the corporate actuarial department for F&B.
Sure.
So literally what would happen is that weekdays I'm at work, Saturdays I'd attend the classes. So this was over a 2-year period. So part-time was over a 2-year period.
Yeah.
So Saturdays I was in class pretty much the whole day. During the week, you then are spending time studying, doing syndicate assignments and the likes. And we had probably like close to like 20 modules that I did in the 2 years, and then research thesis on organizational design and the leadership paper as well that you had to write. So it was quite an intense program, but I think my actuarial studies had already helped me build that discipline and momentum.
Sure.
So it was a very easy pivot away from actuarial exams to that. I think I literally took a 6-month break between qualifying and I was like,
just on brand for you.
So that's how I put my studies in. Now, in terms of the rationale behind doing an MBA, I think for me, as I started getting involved in actuarial work and starting to find your path in the corporate world, I understood that my ambitions and my aspirations were to be beyond an actuary, and I put it in inverted commas because beyond an actuary makes it seem like I think that the profession may not necessarily be like that serious, but I use those terms very loosely in the sense that I knew that I wanted to be a CEO, and run an organization, and that's been my aspiration. And I felt that I needed to equip myself with skills beyond the core technical skills that you require to be an actuary. I needed to augment that with more commerce type skills, strategic type skills. And that's where the MBA lent itself quite well, in the sense that, it's a generalist master's program where you touch on a lot of other topics that you need to know as a leader of an organization and to be able to run that organization effectively. So topics like strategy, topics like marketing, operations, organizational design, people management, leadership. So I felt that the MBA was the natural course to be able to provide myself with the theoretical grounding that I needed for that. And that's why I went to go and do the MBA, and it links then to how I then pivoted away from the actuarial work, because I wanted to translate that away from just being a theoretical discussion to also being able to apply it practically. And that's how I landed myself up in McKinsey, which was to be able to now be able to think strategically. And if I look, I've had the MBA now, I think for like 3, if not 4 years. I'm losing track of time now. McKinsey for like 2 years. And I can definitely say that as a professional, I've definitely become more well-rounded. So I'm able to understand the interdependencies of actuarial work across a broad organization, but I'm also able to see that it's not just the actual work that makes up an organization. That's not one part. And a lot of times it's actually an outcome of a lot of other processes that take place before you get to see the number on the balance sheet and all that, which make up the organization. And I'm now able to contribute at conversations at that level.
Sure. And tell me now at McKinsey, what is your role there? And how does having that actuarial base add also to your ability to do your job well?
100%. So for the listeners, you're probably wondering.
Like this guy is like, everything.
So if you're asking yourself,